founder's story. And let's call up Jeff Burbank from NxStage Medical. Now, I've been interviewing CEOs for a long time. I've met a lot of founders. I've met a lot of founders that have built incredible companies. And I got to say, Jeff is one of the most humble people I've ever met who has accomplished such great things. So NxStage Medical is a home hemodialysis company so that people on dialysis with chronic kidney failure, kidney disease can have their treatment at home. And you know, I don't know if you guys were here last year, but I actually had found out that I had a rare kidney disease a couple days before our last Boston DeviceTalks. And that was a great 6 days in the hospital. It was awesome. But it really started me thinking about the patients on dialysis and really, my God, you know, those kidneys, you don't think about them at all, but once there's problems, it becomes quite apparent how important they are. So I'm really excited to sit down with Jeff here and learn a little bit more about his story.
Thanks for having me, but we're going to leave the humble part behind. We just made the top 100 list. So.
Yeah. It's a big list, I'm telling you. So, Jeff, in doing some research for this interview, I was struck by something I read in the Charleston Gazette, and it was an article. It's an interesting article. It's about a woman who had seen some really some drastic improvement in her chronic kidney disease, but it was something she said about the moment she learned of her diagnosis, and it had progressed to the point of that she needed dialysis as a bridge to a transplant. And she said, "No, I'm not going to do the treatment. I'm just going to accept my fate." And it was a quote she said. She said, "I had seen dialysis clinics, and it was like a sea of comatose bodies. So I decided I was never, ever going to do dialysis. I was fine, so I had plenty of time to make peace, and I decided to go peacefully." If you could, please explain to me how this sentiment resonates with you. First, as someone who's made his career treating these patients, and as a person who has interacted with so many patients in this position in his career.
Well, I think everybody's probably familiar with somebody that's been on dialysis, that's had kidney failure, and what you go through. So that's a truly understandable sentiment. It's a pretty depressing place. The mortality rate of those patients is about 25% annually. So, you know, literally the person to the left or right of you is not going to be there for very long. It's very regimented because it's one of the most mature therapies that we have in medical, and it's one of the most unique reimbursement structures that has really, in one way, created a phenomenal value because it's matured and been refined and gotten to really a level of operationalized that the patient has been lost in it. So technology was invented years ago to keep patients alive, but what we'd like to think is we're a part of giving them a life. You know, that our technology can help the patients do what they want to do in life versus live to go to dialysis 3 times a week for a therapy that lasts about 4 hours. On average, it takes 7 or 8 hours for them to recover from the therapy. So it's just all consuming just to survive. So there are a number of patients that look at that decision and say, we'll let nature take its course. And obviously that's not the course that we were hoping for. Yeah. And I think we've really bent that curve and done some amazing things.
So let's back up. I mean, I sort of gave a cursory review of what NxStage does, but maybe you'd like to improve upon my description or expand upon it.
Yeah, so dialysis is a operationalized therapy that takes place in an outpatient facility, typically 3 times a week for about 4 hours. Takes a little time to get on the therapy and off the therapy, so it really consumes 3 days a week for the patient. And due to the number of patients on the therapy and due to the expense of that, it's been matured to the point where it really is a factory. And all the technology was designed to facilitate that factory, that most efficient delivery of the therapy in the shortest period of time, and the most number of patients through a dialysis center to amortize the overhead and the labor. We looked at it totally differently and said, one, you could probably improve clinical outcomes if you can customize the therapy to the patient versus the patient to the therapy, not put every patient on 4 times or 3 times a week, 4 hours a day. To do that, we thought it had to be patient-driven, and the location didn't want to be in a center, it wanted to be at home. So we started with a white piece of paper and designed a technology that was simple enough, cost-effective enough, flexible enough, easy enough, safe enough to take those structures, break them down so that patients could do the therapy where they wanted, when they wanted, under the prescription of their physician. So really totally turned it upside down.
But home hemodialysis is not actually a very new concept, right? I mean, I think I read that you said that it was first became available in the late 60s and early 70s and was predominantly done at home because of the lack of hospital or clinic-based facilities. I think you said that like roughly 40% of patients undergoing hemodialysis were doing it at home in the early 70s, right?
They were, and that was at a time before dialysis centers were really available and reimbursement wasn't widely available as well. So those were primarily patients that had means, and it was a small number of patients, even though a high percentage, because there weren't that many patients on dialysis at that time.
What kind of machines were they using at that point?
They looked a lot like old washing machines.
Really?
Dialysis has come a long way. It's been a phenomenal example of what can happen in a technology area. Mm-hmm. So they literally were, something that would look arcane to us now. Dialysis does 2 things. It's removing toxins and it's removing fluid from the patient. So it's at its simplest form. It's a bunch of blood circuits and fluid pathways mm-hmm. that do this. And in the early days, they literally were tubs filled with dialysate and a membrane sunk inside them. So it's come a long way. And
then what precipitated the shift into the clinic-based or the hospital-based care?
Reimbursement. Reimbursement that was, and for those of you that don't know, dialysis is one of the only entitlements. Doesn't matter what age you are, after 30 months, you'll become a Medicare covered individual. So it is a very unique program in that Medicare pays for approximately 90% of the patients in the country as a result. So it's really a unique segment of healthcare. It's a capitated environment. So in a lot of ways, I think of dialysis as, setting the trends in a lot of medicine.
And when you started your career, you've been working in this field for a bit. When did you start your career?
Right out of school in the mid '80s.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did the industry look like when you started? You were in the dialysis space then, correct?
Yeah. So not a lot different than what it looks like today. Yeah. In terms of the companies, most of them are around. There's been some aggregation there. There's a whole lot more patients, so we have 3 times the number of patients that we did in the 80s. It's grown about between 5 and 10% a year, so tremendous growth rate in number of patients. The technology has incrementally improved for traditional in-center, and then we kind of went a different direction, which is starting to create a new option for patients.
Right. So there's a couple different entrepreneurs. There's sort of accidental entrepreneurs and very intentional ones. How would you describe yourself? Are you an accidental entrepreneur, or are you somebody that set out to start a company?
So I was always an entrepreneur. So I'm an entrepreneur first, probably, and a dialysis entrepreneur second. So I did a lot of entrepreneurial things growing up. So it was always my calling. I just didn't know where it would get applied. And I got very excited about how you can change the course of a chronic patient's life, and trained as an engineer. So, where do you want to apply that? This was a phenomenal area where you could really impact the course of someone's life.
So you say you were always an entrepreneur, though?
I really was, yep.
Like
In high school,
about
I
some
was
examples?
building hydroponic greenhouses for people.
Okay. Where'd you grow up?
Next question.
So let's talk about the scientific and business reasons as to why this was the right space for you in what is now your career, basically.
So we saw a space. Traditional dialysis had matured to be so big and so industrial, and the production defined the product so much. There was so much inflexibility. And the literature was emerging. As you said, there was some folks doing home dialysis, and some were doing some really progressive work and saying, well, what happens if you dialyze a little bit more? It's kind of counterintuitive because dialysis is pretty brutal on the body when you do it 3 times a week. But some said, you know, like other medical specialties, if we do it more frequently, maybe we can manage the patients in a tighter zone, maybe we can get better clinical outcomes, maybe we can reduce hospitalization. So the literature started to move and say, that's a huge opportunity. Maybe we can cut costs, improve quality of life, but there wasn't a technology that exists that allowed patients to kind of make that transition from the in-center. Because you really couldn't take the existing technology and put it in your home. You'd have to literally build a dialysis center in your home. So there needed to be an innovation, and we thought that the incumbents would be slow to respond because they couldn't take their current assets and redeploy them to this opportunity that you really did have to develop ground up for it. So we thought that gave us enough opportunity to go through that window, and in fact, they were slower than we thought to respond. We went through the window. We've created a business that will have revenues over $350 million this year. We have 3,300 employees, and it's been a phenomenal run.
That's awesome. But you knew that the incumbents were slow because you were working at one, right?
Yes, and I knew the limitations. So we all talk and investors talk about the product, and very few people really get below that and realize that behind a product is a whole supply chain and a manufacturing capability. And in our case, we even design our own automation because the results of automation define your economics, your quality, your performance so well that that's a strategic advantage. Yeah. So when you design a product in our space, you're also designing a whole manufacturing system to make it, because we have high volume disposables that have to have a quality that's unbelievable. I mean, we're taking patients' blood out of their body in their home and returning it safely. So it's in a sense a consumer product that has medical acuity. It's an amazing thing to do. Yeah. So you can't just pivot that way. Your capabilities are defined by your manufacturing infrastructure, and we didn't think those would apply to this new world.
So you see all this literature as you're working in this space. I assume you're seeing this in your position. I think you're at Gambro or something like that?
I was, yep.
Did you think, well, we need to do this as a company, or did you think that I have to do this as a spin out or as an independent company?
I was, some would argue that I wasn't a great employee, but I was a good one on this one. I wanted to do this at Cobe and Gambro. Yeah. Tried to do it there for a while and couldn't get traction. So.
Why? I mean, just because it didn't make economic sense for them? They were making too much money, or?
It was when you have an operating business to take significant capital and apply it to a high risk potential reward. It's a tough thing to do. Yeah. Venture capital model works a lot better for that. Yeah.
So you say what? Like, do you go home and say, you're married? Do you have children at this point, or?
I'm married to a phenomenal woman. Yes. Same one that I was married to at the start of this. We have 4 kids, 4 boys.
So do you go home and say, so I'm leaving my cushy job and I'm going to do this thing? I mean,
that's why I always have to say how phenomenal she was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, that was, she's brave.
But you didn't actually, it's not linear, right? You started Vasca first.
I did.
before you started NxStage. So
Yeah,
you had-
NxStage is the second company, which was a spin out from the first company.
So you had the hypothesis in your mind, but you saw a different path there with Vasca when you started that in 1996?
Yeah, so Vasca was an implantable vascular access port designed for dialysis patients, and that was presented to me as an opportunity by a surgeon and a nephrologist that wanted to start a company. And I always assumed that if we're going to move the therapy home, we need to make vascular access easier to do for patients. So I applied my efforts there first.
So is this like engineering thinking? This is 1.0 kind of thing? I mean,
A little bit. It was this problem needed to be solved in my mind before you could get to the bigger problem of moving dialysis to the home.
that's
Yeah.
interesting. But you didn't stay with Vasca. You spun NxStage out of Vasca.
That's right. Yeah. I spun NxStage out. I moved to NxStage, was chairman of Vasca for a while.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's an interesting move.
It was my training wheels, to be honest. I learned a lot at Vasca. If nothing else, and many of you have experienced this, takes a lot of courage to run a startup, and Vasca kind of gave me the confidence and courage to do what I was able to do at NxStage.
And what was the end result when you left in 1999? Did you stayed on the board in that company?
It ultimately got sold.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you think was the most important thing you learned there that you took with you on NxStage? And it probably, for the benefit of this audience, not technical.
Yeah, no, it was, you probably, you probably do know your business better than the money. That, there's a lot of smart money, there's a lot of great venture capitalists that can add a lot, but they're not in the day-to-day of the market, the technology, the product. And if you feel strongly about something, go down fighting versus cave.
Right. And so NxStage opens its doors in 1999. How many people are in that office with you? Are you in a garage, or are you?
We were borrowing space from Vasca
Okay.
at that time.
Cool, yeah, because you're spinning it out. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Coincidentally, how did your investors at Vasca feel about that?
Very supportive.
Okay.
2 shots on goal.
Okay. Well, one went in, right?
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, they did.
Well,
They
both, I
did
guess.
nicely on
They both
Vasca,
did good.
or on NxStage too.
So let's talk about when you're starting this company and you're looking at it, you're saying, okay, we know that patients will experience better outcomes if they have more frequent exposure to dialysis. We know that that's better done at home.
You're a little strong. No is not the word.
So
we thought, we hoped.
Right,
Yeah.
we hoped
Yeah.
that this was the case because our instincts led us this way, but you look at the market and you're literally going against, like you said, a factory.
Yep.
Massive companies.
Yep.
What's your philosophy in taking these companies on as a competitor?
So it's funny because I was listening to the previous group about disruption. I spent a lot of my time talking about not being a disruptor, because a disruptor is not something you want to have a discussion with the FDA about. It's not something you want to have with a clinician because it implies risk, and chronic care is generally very conservative. So I spent a lot of time talking about how we were going to add a capability that would be good for a group of patients so that we could kind of work our way in there and try not to take on directly, and try to deflect all of that kind of energy, because that energy can end up working against you versus working for you.
So you say that you take them, I think you told us once that you find cracks in the business model to fill.
Yeah.
So that's what you did.
Yes. Yeah. It was an unmet need that existed in the market. We helped to define it, expand the unmet need, and fulfill that unmet need.
What do you think has been the biggest resistance point for you guys?
Oh, it's absolutely that people are comfortable with what they're doing. The whole system is set up from every aspect, and the previous group hit on a bunch. You've got reimbursement, clinical practice, infrastructure, product cost and quality and maturity. There's just so many different vectors that come at you that have to be dealt with. Right. And you have to find ways to show success along the way so people continue to believe and see progress towards you create a dream and you sell the dream, and then you try to create reality against that dream, and you have to be very systematic about how you present those successful steps so people continue to believe in the dream.
Right. So when you started NxStage and you're in this ecosystem where you have these big, massive companies, you must have been thinking, I'll build this and I can exit to a bigger company, or did you?
We never really thought about it that way. Either we were dumb, because that would have been a great strategy, and I'd be on a beach somewhere now. But no, we always thought that the way to build a company is to build a company that you're focused on creating a large, independent, successful company. That's the better strategy, because you can't control buyers, acquirers strategy. So you could get to that point and not be making the investments that would carry you forward and get creamed. So we always, every discussion we ever had was about how do we build a great company.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because I do think that there's a lot, especially as we cover the industry, and if you look at technology, there seems to be a huge emphasis on the exit or the liquidity event, and I don't think enough entrepreneurs think about building a great company. So what do you see as even in the early days, what were some of the things you thought about to create a great company? Like, what were some of the ingredients you thought that cake needed?
People.
Yeah.
I think everybody likes to make it about technology, markets, those things. It's not. It's about getting, and they're right over here too, it's about putting together the best team you can possibly put together, because people solve problems, people find markets, people make production work. It's all about people, and creating an environment where successful people, talented people can be successful. So it really, and they'll push you and they'll drive you, and sometimes even drive you nuts. But it's all about people.
I assume you've learned this in your business school background, right? You have an MBA? Or?
That was a setup question for
Yes,
you
it
guys.
So
No,
you don't have
I
an
don't
MBA,
have an
but you
MBA.
guys should, right?
No.
So you didn't learn that.
But
in
my
business.
father did.
Your father.
One order removed.
But everybody that works for you now has an MBA. Right?
Pretty much, I
Yeah.
guess.
So you kind of learned on the job, right? I mean,
Yeah.
what was the hardest? I mean, do you remember some of the mistakes you made? Early
How
as-
long is this?
We can pick a couple.
Yeah, it takes you a while to figure out how to identify and motivate good people. Getting through an interview process and understanding, are they real? Can they get things done? Because you can't hide in a startup or a fast-growing company. Everybody's got to be pulling. There's this great saying about carrying the emperor, and all the people carrying the emperor, and are they actually pushing up to lift the emperor, or are they hanging on? Yeah. And in a fast-growing company, everybody has to be pushing up. We all have to be carrying the ball forward. And so finding people that actually can do that versus talk about it, you got to sort through that, and then knitting together a team, because you want diversity, because that there's strength and power that comes out of that, but you have to function too. So the blend between the individual and the team is very interesting.
In that metaphor, who's the emperor? Are you? Or?
No, it's actually probably just a stone sitting on it.
So you told me that you kind of operate under the assumption that you have three stakeholders. That's your patients, right? Your shareholders and your employees.
Yes.
What's the trick to making sure one doesn't supersede the other?
I think the first is to be clear with all three that my role is to be the referee. My role is to find the right balance to reward all of those stakeholders appropriately, not let one take from another inappropriately. That builds, I think, some trust and some confidence and some understanding going in. And then, it's communication, dialogue, thought, all those types of things that go into it. But, being clear about what your goal is, how you operate, how you think about this with those stakeholders is really valuable. And it solves a lot of problems. In my case, it solves a lot of problems moving forward.
And you have a 97% approval rating on Glassdoor. Did you know that?
My assistant tells me. She's very proud of it.
I'm no math major. That's pretty good.
I'm trying to find those 3 people.
And when you do, try not to be humble on this one. How do you, I mean, Glassdoor is becoming a more important thing every day as workers are getting more.
It's a huge recruiting tool.
You
You do have to pay attention to your presence, your web presence. You've got to make sure that the message is getting out because you're competing for talent. So you want to create, this is another aspect of how do you get the best people. You've got to have the best footprint on the web that says this is a great place to work. You know, he's an inspiring CEO.
Yeah.
Once they get to know me, then that's a different issue. But you can at least create it on the internet.
I think you're pretty inspiring. Don't be humble. How did you do that? How do 9.7 out of 10
So you were
people?
asking me earlier, what did I learn about VASCA? At VASCA, one of the things I learned is how important culture is, and that was probably one of the hardest thing for me because I'm trained as an engineer.
Right.
So like I'm over here but I realized that if you're just honest about it and you go, they're laughing. If you go and you just be yourself as dorky as you are and you talk to people about it and you talk to them about the value of it and why we need it, it becomes real and believable, and you got to live it and you can't be contradictory to it. But a culture, if you were to have the opportunity to come to NxStage, the first thing you see when you come in is our mission statement, which is a bit unique. You probably haven't seen one like it. And we start every meeting with one of the elements of it. We talk about it all the time. There's a thing I call cultural dilution, which is really growth rate. There were times where we were tripling our revenue every year for 3 years in a row. Think about that. So we had points where 70% of our employees were new within the last 12 months. So that's huge cultural dilution, and you have to offset that by working really, really hard at teaching people what are the NxStage values, how do we interact with each other, what do we believe in, how do we work, how do we play, all those kinds of things. Hugely uncomfortable to an engineer, but it's really important for creating a company.
How did you create those values? Were they something you sat down day one with your pen and notepad, or
no? We paid a consulting firm. No,
they said be authentic.
we grabbed a group of the initial employees. We said we'll have 2 meetings. We'll have an hour meeting now, and then we'll wait 2 weeks and we'll reread what we wrote, and that's what came out of it. And I think we're probably more proud of it today because it's still very relevant. As it was. So it was created by NxStage, so it's part of us.
You're a bit of a rare breed in that you started your company, you brought it public, you're still there, you're 16, 17 years later?
Yeah.
I mean, are you impressed by this? I'm impressed by this. I mean, you knew how hard it was. I mean, did you think, how many times during this journey were you like, if I could just...
Oh, I've been fired like 6 times. So. No, I'm not impressed by it. I'm honored that everybody still believes I'm the right guy to run the company. I never thought, like, the company's not Jeff Burbank, the company's NxStage.
Yeah.
And it's really incredible to me that I'm still relevant given where we are, and that's a blast. Yeah. But I'm a big shareholder, so if there's somebody better to run NxStage, come talk to me, because if we can make more money with somebody else or do better, I'm the first guy that'll move aside, because it's about that value creation.
Yeah. There's a lot of really talented people in this room, so we probably...
Yeah, careful what you ask for. Yeah.
Did you, I know you've used a lot of things to become a better boss. I mean, I think you said you do coaching and all that stuff.
I do. It's funny, a lot of people have an issue with saying they have a coach. I mean, show me an Olympic athlete that doesn't have a coach.
Yeah.
And I've had great coaches. I don't know if I wear them out or I don't know what happens, but you do get stale because you need edginess between you and your coach. So you need them to call you out on stuff. And I am a bit of a relationship guy, so I think you build a relationship that takes away some of that edginess. So I do turn them over every once in a while. And the company has grown, so what I needed to learn 10 years ago isn't what I need to learn today. So tried to keep the coaching fresh, have a phenomenal board that's been incredibly helpful, very diverse in skills and people, so that's been really helpful. And I just want to be successful, so I want to listen and soak up anything I can.
So you're a founding CEO, so are you a yeller?
No, I have yelled. And I think the whole company stops when I yell because I'm not a yeller.
Oh, no.
And everyone knows.
Are you a 4 a.m. emailer?
Rarely. Accidentally from somewhere in the planet, but not intentionally.
Are you a workaholic?
I work a lot. I'm proud. With that said, here's a little statistic. We haven't had a single divorce in the company.
Wow.
So I think it's really important to, I think it's a combination of we respect that and try to be very flexible, and we hire well.
Yeah.
It's a blend of things, but I have 4 boys. We've got a lot of family, and my world has 2 pieces, and those 2 pieces, and I'm a better boss because I'm a good dad and husband. So
I'd like to close on that last stakeholder, the first stakeholder we talked about, the patient, and just what you're giving to these folks, and what the stigma that people on dialysis suffer from. Besides the disease, what's the perception that we have to break about these folks?
Yeah, thanks for asking, because this is where I'm going to get animated. If you go into a dialysis center, you're probably going to go in there during work hours. What you're going to see during work hours are people that don't have a job. So they're going to be the oldest, most frail. They're going to look like they're unhealthy. There's a perception due to dialysis patients going to the hospital, those are the most acute. There's a perception that dialysis patients didn't manage their diabetes or hypertension, so they're non-compliant. So it's their fault that they became a dialysis patient, which is absolutely insane. They probably didn't have the tools, they probably didn't have the opportunity, and that carries all the way through people saying, that patient can't do home hemodialysis, or that patient can't, be successful on dialysis, and that's ridiculous. It's our obligation to give these people an opportunity, give them the chance to do it, to take control of their life, give them the tools to do that, and not be held to the stigma of, oh, you're non-compliant, therefore we're going to accept, mediocrity for them. And it just, we're trying to change that, and we need your help in changing that.
Because how many people in the population end up on dialysis? 1 out of 10?
So it's less than that, but there's about 500,000 dialysis patients in the country right now.
Okay, so it's much more rare.
Yeah, there's 1 out of 10 has kidney disease, but fewer than that, last to dialysis is a bad way to say it.
Yeah. And I would imagine you hear from them a lot, these patients.
We do. That's great, though. We bring patients to our all-hands meetings, never a dry eye in the room with those. So we all feel so proud of what we're doing for them. But I don't want to steal your thunder. Are you going to finish what that lady wrote in?
If you could finish the quote, you can.
Well, so she said she'd never go on dialysis. Then she found out about NxStage and went on dialysis. And she's been very successful, and then went on to get a transplant. So, I don't have to work at the mission. I have to work at communicating the mission and figuring out how to get the team working well and articulating the objectives. But the mission is so powerful that it sells itself.
Absolutely. Well, it's just a wonderful story. It's a wonderful technology, and thanks so much for sharing that with us today.
Thanks for
Congratulations.
delaying your commute home.